5 o'clock and 2 minutes in the morning. I was standing in my sunroom, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee, staring at my smartphone screen like it had just whispered an impossible secret. The screen glowed bright in the dim dawn light. One notification, one text message from an unlisted secondary line. 5 simple words: "Don't go in today. Trust me." The message came directly from Simon Patel, Senior Legal Counsel at Crestview Global, our firm's absolute crown jewel account. Crestview was a $412 million corporate enterprise that had anchored our balance sheet for nearly a decade. Senior corporate attorneys at giant multinational clients do not send cryptic text messages to account directors before the sun rises. Unless a massive seismic fault line is about to split wide open right beneath your feet. The initial reaction inside me was not panic. At 54 years old, after 25 years in corporate strategy and risk compliance, panic is an emotional luxury you burn out of your system early in your career. When you have spent decades navigating high-stakes contractual disputes, corporate reorganizations, and regulatory audits, you learn that panic solves nothing. Muscle memory takes over instead. I walked over to the kitchen counter and checked my digital calendar. Today was Wednesday, the day of the 11 o'clock morning master strategy pitch. It was the culmination of 12 full months of exhaustive preparation, strategy alignment, compliance restructuring, and painstaking client relationship building. I had spent countless late nights refining slide decks, calculating risk mitigation formulas, and hand-holding Crestview's executive board through complex legal transitions. Now, sudden radio silence from their lead attorney. My thumb hovered over the glass touchscreen of my phone. I typed out a quick message asking why, paused, and erased it. I typed another asking if he was serious, then backspaced over every letter. In my line of work, when a seasoned general counsel tells you to stay away, you do not press for details over unencrypted text channels. You obey the warning. I typed a single word back: understood. Then I put the phone face down on the granite counter and took a slow sip of my black coffee. My hands remained completely steady. Working night shifts as a young man to put myself through business school taught me the difference between a sudden emergency and a calculated maneuvering. You learn when to react instantly and when to stand perfectly still and let the trap snap shut on whoever set it. By 6 o'clock and 30 minutes, the pale morning sunlight was casting long amber shadows across my backyard patio. I sat in my armchair, watching the microwave clock tick away the seconds. Simon Patel was never dramatic. He was a ruthless, razor-sharp corporate attorney who measured every word he spoke. If he sent a pre-dawn warning, it was an intentional beacon. Calling him back on the phone would only risk spooking the waters or putting him in an uncomfortable legal position. Instead, I stayed put. I showered, shaved, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Not to go into the corporate office, but because a professional always prepares for whatever meeting might lie ahead. At exactly 9 o'clock and 15 minutes, the official email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Formal decision, notice of executive action." There was no polite morning greeting. There was no signature block or contact phone number. Just 3 sharp sentences written by our newly appointed Vice President of Operations, Preston Thorne. Preston was 34 years old, carried a custom-engraved tablet, spoke exclusively in corporate podcast jargon, and introduced himself to prospective clients by scanning a digital QR code on his wristwatch. The email read, "You have made your explicit choice regarding corporate priorities by failing to present yourself for pre-briefing. We will handle the 11 o'clock client presentation without your presence. Human Resources has been instructed to process your immediate operational separation. We wish you success in your future endeavors." No phone call. No face-to-face exit review. No opportunity to explain that I was following a direct warning from the lead attorney of our largest account. Just a cold, sanitized execution executed through a cloud server keyboard. I stared at the glowing laptop monitor. My mind processed the phrase operational separation with cold clarity. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my mug against the desk. I simply sat perfectly still while the steam from my fresh mug of coffee slowly dissipated into the room. Preston Thorne genuinely believed that I had ghosted the company. He believed I had panicked, abandoned my post, and intentionally sabotaged my own pitch meeting right before the biggest account renewal of the fiscal year. That was his narrative. A carefully constructed trap designed by a smug executive who thought he could use a single morning absence to eliminate me. 2 weeks earlier, Preston had called me into his glass-walled corner office during his very first week on the job. He leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and informed me with an insufferable smirk that I represented legacy DNA inside the organization. That was his exact phrase, legacy DNA. As if 25 years of industry knowledge, master contract negotiations, and deep client trust made me an ancient artifact embedded in the foundation of a company that desperately needed a modern digital facelift. Preston told me that modern enterprise management required agile touchpoints and friction-free transitions. He claimed that senior directors like me, who relied on old-fashioned personal trust and detailed risk management rather than high-speed automated software pods, were holding back the firm's institutional evolution. I had listened patiently, taken neat notes in my leather ledger, and watched as he systematically attempted to reroute my client communication channels to his inexperienced young strategy team. I knew he was looking for an excuse to push me out the door. I just did not anticipate he would strike before breakfast. I did not reply to his email. I did not send a panicked message to human resources. I did not reach out to my colleagues on internal chat groups. Instead, I stood up from my chair, walked into my home study, unlocked the heavy steel fireproof safe beneath my desk, and pulled out a bound paper copy of the original Master Services Agreement between our company and Crestview Global. I had personally negotiated that master contract 3 full years ago. It was drafted after Crestview's previous management team experienced a massive compliance breakdown, and our strategic guidance had saved their executive board from catastrophic regulatory penalties. Buried deep within the 52 pages of dense legalese under Section 14, Subpart B was a very specific, non-standard clause titled Key Person Dependency and Executive Oversight. My full legal name was explicitly written into that clause. If Preston Thorne or anyone on his high-tech management team had actually taken the time to read the master contract instead of relying on glossy overview summaries, they would have realized what that clause entailed. But intuition told me to keep quiet. I folded the contract document, placed it neatly inside my leather briefcase, locked my front door, and drove down toward the corporate office building downtown. When I arrived at the human resources floor at 10 o'clock sharp, the atmosphere was thick with uncomfortable silence. Human resources departments are universally designed to look like neutral corporate lounges. Beige carpet, plastic indoor plants, and abstract artwork chosen specifically to evoke zero emotional response. As I stepped through the glass doors, none of the administrative staff made eye contact with me. They kept their eyes glued to their desktop monitors, terrified that catching my gaze might draw them into a corporate dispute. A young human resources representative named Gavin Miller stepped out of a private office. Gavin looked barely old enough to have completed an undergraduate degree, nervously clutching a thick manila folder as if it contained hazardous materials. "Mr. Grant Vance?" Gavin asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I am Grant Vance," I replied, keeping my tone quiet, level, and entirely measured. In corporate environments, when someone is trying to provoke an emotional outburst that they can later weaponize against you, the most devastating response is absolute, calm composure. He gestured nervously toward a small windowless conference room. "Please step inside. This is your formal voluntary separation paperwork package. You will maintain basic healthcare extension options through standard federal guidelines." To understand why a $412 million corporate titan like Crestview Global had placed a personal reliance clause on a 54-year-old strategist, you have to look back at how modern executive suites operate. Over the last decade, corporate culture has been infected by a dangerous illusion. The belief that deep human trust, hard-earned expertise, and complex regulatory comprehension can be replaced by standardized software templates, offshore strategy pods, and 30-something executives who talk exclusively in buzzwords. When Preston Thorne joined Pinnacle Group as Vice President of Operations 14 days ago, he did not bother reviewing the history of our key accounts. He did not ask to see the historical compliance filings, the patent indemnity agreements under Title 35 of the United States Code, or the delicate contractual balances we had maintained with regulatory bodies. He saw only numbers, titles, and payroll expenses. And in his mind, my salary represented a prime target for corporate margin optimization. During my 25 years in enterprise advisory, I had witnessed dozens of executives like Preston Thorne come and go. They arrive with immaculate suits, custom tablet cases, and aggressive slide decks promising instant 20% margin enhancements. They view long-standing account directors not as valuable assets, but as legacy obstacles blocking their personal climb up the executive ladder. Preston was convinced that client relationships were modular plugs, that you could simply yank out a seasoned professional who possessed decades of nuanced context and insert a polished junior analyst trained to recite scripted talking points. He was fundamentally wrong. Crestview Global was not a standard corporate account that responded to generic enthusiasm and automated graphics. They were a heavily scrutinized enterprise operating under rigorous federal compliance mandates and complex patent frameworks. 3 years earlier, when Crestview faced a devastating breach, a fiduciary duty crisis caused by a previous executive team's negligence, their stock price had plummeted, and federal regulators had threatened severe administrative sanctions. I was the strategist brought in to stabilize the ship. Working alongside Simon Patel, Crestview's brilliant general counsel, and Diane Montgomery, their formidable chief executive officer, I spent 8 months constructing an ironclad compliance architecture. We overhauled their operational frameworks, established rigorous internal controls under federal governance standards, and structured a comprehensive enterprise agreement that protected their board from future liability. During those exhausting months of emergency meetings and late-night regulatory reviews, Diane Montgomery made one thing abundantly clear to Pinnacle's senior leadership. Crestview was not signing a contract with a generic corporate entity. They were placing their trust in Grant Vance. She insisted that as long as Crestview retained Pinnacle Group for strategic governance, I had to personally oversee every major operational protocol and compliance review. To solidify that requirement, Simon Patel drafted Section 14, Subpart B into the Master Enterprise Services Agreement. It was an explicit key person dependency clause. The language was uncompromising. It stipulated that any unapproved removal, termination, or reassignment of Grant Vance from primary account oversight would constitute an immediate material breach of contract, granting Crestview Global the absolute legal right to terminate the $412 million agreement on the spot without penalty, while triggering immediate financial clawbacks on all prepaid management fees. When Preston Thorne began his systematic takeover 2 weeks ago, he ignored the bound master contract sitting in the legal vault. He relied instead on a high-level summary spreadsheet prepared by an intern, which listed account names and annual contract values but omitted full contractual covenants. When he saw my name attached to the highest compensation line on the division ledger, he saw an opportunity to make a dramatic splash before the executive board. He began reassigning my administrative responsibilities to his newly formed strategy pod, a group of 3 junior analysts who knew how to generate colorful charts but had never read a federal compliance mandate in their lives. He altered project schedules, changed communication channels, and told internal staff that Grant Vance was being transitioned toward retirement to make way for agile modern methodology. I watched every single move he made with calm precision. When an arrogant superior begins digging his own professional grave, a wise veteran does not interrupt him. You hand him the shovel and step back far enough so that none of the flying dirt lands on your polished shoes. On Tuesday afternoon, the day before the master pitch meeting, Preston had walked past my desk without making eye contact, dropping a printed copy of his new presentation deck onto my blotter. The front slide read, Crestview Strategic Evolution 2.0, Integrated Agile Governance. My name was completely absent from the deck. In its place was Preston Thorne listed as Master Enterprise Lead, supported by his team of junior analysts. I flipped through the pages. Every single strategic formula, compliance framework, An operational milestone in that deck was taken directly from my proprietary work over the past 3 years. He had stripped out the nuanced legal contexts, replaced my detailed risk metrics with bubbly graphic icons, and repackaged 25 years of professional expertise into a generic sales pitch. He leaned against the edge of my desk, adjusting his cuffs. "Grant, we are taking a modernized approach to the Crestview presentation tomorrow. We need to project a fresh, youthful, technology-first image to their board. I will handle the presentation directly." The 31st floor of Crestview Global's corporate tower in downtown represented the absolute pinnacle of corporate power. The main executive boardroom featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the harbor, a custom-built 20-foot mahogany conference table polished to a mirror shine, and an atmosphere so intensely quiet that you could hear the soft click of a fountain pen across the room. At 10 o'clock and 50 minutes in the morning, Preston Thorne walked through the double-glass doors of the boardroom like a conqueror entering a captured city. He was dressed in a sleek $1,000 designer suit, wearing polished leather loafers without socks, carrying an ultra-thin laptop beneath his arm. Behind him trailed his 3 junior team members, 2 nervous analysts clutching digital tablets, and a young compliance officer who looked as though she had not slept in 3 days. Preston flashed his practiced, teeth-baring smile at the receptionist, smoothed his silk tie, and took his place at the head of the presentation side of the table. To him, this 11 o'clock meeting was not merely an account renewal. It was his formal personal coronation before Pinnacle Group's board of directors. He was ready to prove that he could close a $412 million contract renewal while simultaneously purging expensive legacy directors from the company ledger. However, the mood inside the boardroom was arctic. Sitting at the far center of the table was Diane Montgomery, Chief Executive Officer of Crestview Global. Diane was a formidable woman in her late 50s, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She did not return Preston's smile. She did not offer a polite greeting. She sat motionless, her hands steepled beneath her chin, her dark eyes tracking Preston's every movement with terrifying intensity. To her left sat Simon Patel, General Counsel. Simon had his leather legal binder closed on the mahogany surface, a simple yellow legal pad resting beside his silver ballpoint pen. To Diane's right sat Clifford Marshall, Crestview's veteran chief financial officer, a heavy-set man with graying temples who usually greeted account teams with warm handshakes, but who currently sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw locked shut. Preston, entirely blind to the dangerous silence in the room, plugged his laptop into the central display system. "Good morning, members of the executive board," he projected, his voice filled with practiced theatrical enthusiasm. "I am Preston Thorne, Vice President of Operations at Pinnacle Group. We are thrilled to present our vision for Crestview Strategic Evolution 2.0. Silence met his opening statement. Neither Diane Montgomery nor Simon Patel offered a single head nod. Preston clicked his remote control, bringing up slide 1, a massive high-definition graphic of a winding mountain road with the text overlay, "Navigating New Horizons Through Modern Leadership." Today, Preston continued, pacing smoothly along the side of the table, "We are unveiling a transformed operational model designed to streamline your account workflows, eliminate legacy redundancies, and integrate agile cross-functional pods into your daily compliance infrastructure." Simon Patel slowly reached for his silver pen, unclipped it, and recorded a single word on his legal pad. He did not look at the presentation screen. Preston pressed forward, clicking to slide 5, which showcased a series of complex operational formulas. He spent 10 minutes waxing poetic about modern touchpoints, digital transformation, and frictionless integration. He used every corporate buzzword in his repertoire, presenting my proprietary risk mitigation structures as if they were brand new concepts invented by his internal team over the weekend. By the 15-minute mark of his presentation, Preston noticed that no one on Crestview's executive team was taking notes. Clifford Marshall sat staring at the tabletop. Diane Montgomery had not shifted her posture by a single millimeter. Preston paused, clearing his throat lightly. "As you can see from our restructuring model, We have effectively optimized internal oversight by transitioning away from single-point legacy dependencies. This allows our firm to deliver a 16% increase in response velocity while reducing reliance on senior individual personnel. At the word legacy dependencies, Simon Patel raised his head. His eyes locked onto Preston with cold, analytical focus. Mr. Thorne, Simon interrupted, his voice calm, clear, and perfectly modulated. Can you explain precisely how your new Agile Strategy Pod intends to manage the specific regulatory compliance mandates outlined under federal governing protocols? Preston smiled, waving his hand dismissively. Absolutely, Mr. Patel. Our cross-functional team has fully digitized all compliance documentation into automated cloud modules. Our junior analysts are thoroughly trained to monitor system alerts in real time. Simon tilted his head slightly. I am not asking about software modules, Mr. Thorne. I am asking about historical operational context. Who specifically on your team holds primary legal authority for interpreting our cross-border licensing protocols and managing federal compliance filings? Preston glanced quickly at his analysts, who immediately dropped their eyes toward their tablets. Well, as I noted, that oversight is now distributed horizontally across our operational pod to ensure maximum agility. Distributed horizontally, Simon repeated, recording the exact phrase on his yellow pad, meaning there is no single senior executive responsible for oversight. Preston's smile tightened at the edges. We believe modern enterprise accounts thrive under collaborative pod structures rather than old-fashioned individual reliance. The silence that settled over the 31st floor boardroom was so heavy that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to freeze in place. Preston Thorne stood at the head of the table, his presentations remote still clutched in his right hand, his confidence beginning to crumble beneath the weight of Simon Patel's piercing gaze. Simon reached into his leather binder, pulled out a stapled set of documents printed on heavy archival paper, and slid them slowly across the polished mahogany table. The paper made a clean, whispering sound as it came to rest directly in front of Preston. Turn to page 42, section 14, subpart B. Simon instructed, his voice as sharp as a scalpel. Preston hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached down to flip through the pages. Beside him, his junior compliance officer leaned in to read over his shoulder. As her eyes scanned the highlighted text, all the color drained from her face, and she took a sudden step back from the table. "Write it aloud, Mr. Thorne," Diane Montgomery commanded from the center of the table. Preston swallowed hard, his throat visibly dry. His eyes darted across the black lettering of the contract. "Key person dependency and executive oversight," he began, his voice cracking slightly on the very first sentence. "It is explicitly agreed between the parties that the ongoing strategic direction, legal compliance oversight, and account governance provided by Grant M. Vance constitutes an essential, non-severable inducement for Crestview Global entering into this agreement." He paused, sweat appearing along his forehead. "Continue reading," Simon Patel demanded coldly. Preston's hands shook as he held the paper. "Any unapproved termination, involuntary reassignment, or operational separation of Grant M. Vance by Pinnacle Group shall constitute an immediate, non-curable material breach of contract under Section 22. Upon such breach, Crestview Global retains the unconditional right to terminate this agreement immediately, demand full clawback of all advance management retainers paid over the preceding 12 months, and pursue full legal remedies for breach of fiduciary duty." Preston dropped the document onto the table as if it had burned his fingertips. "But this is an administrative oversight," he stammered, looking frantically around the room at his team members. "Our legal department never flagged this clause during our internal transition review." "That is because your internal transition review was conducted by individuals who value corporate buzzwords over basic contract law," Simon Patel shot back, standing up slowly from his seat. "Grant Vance personally drafted that protective covenant with our legal team 3 years ago to ensure that Crestview Global would never be subjected to the incompetent whims of transient junior executives." Preston turned desperate eyes toward Diane Montgomery. "Mrs. Montgomery, please understand, this can be rectified immediately. I will personally call Grant right now. We can offer him a consulting role, reinstate his title, or bring him into the advisory loop. He was simply confused about his attendance today. Grant Vance was not confused, Diane Montgomery said, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. Grant Vance received an explicit instruction from our legal counsel at 5 o'clock this morning to stay clear of your reckless display. He possessed the professional intelligence and loyalty to respect our instructions, while you possessed the arrogance to fire the most valuable asset in your entire firm before noon. Clifford Marshall, the chief financial officer, slammed his heavy palm against the mahogany table, making everyone flinch. You just triggered an immediate $48 million retainer clawback against your company, Thorne. $48 million in prepaid management fees that your firm must return to Crestview within 30 business days. Preston's face turned completely white. He looked like a man who had stepped off a cliff and was suddenly realizing there was no parachute behind him. I can fix this, he whispered weakly. We can renegotiate the terms. We can amend Section 14 right now. You will renegotiate nothing, Simon Patel stated firmly. As of 9 o'clock and 15 minutes this morning, when you issued your formal termination notice to Grant Vance, Pinnacle Group entered into active material breach of contract. Crestview Global hereby formally exercises its right under Section 22 to terminate the Master Enterprise Services Agreement, effective immediately. Simon pulled a formal legal notice from his folder and placed it on top of the contract. This is our official notice of default and immediate termination. By 4 o'clock and 37 minutes in the afternoon, I was sitting on the back deck of my home, enjoying the quiet rustle of the oak trees in the late afternoon breeze. The tension of the morning had completely dissolved, replaced by the deep, tranquil satisfaction that only comes when long-term strategic patience pays off in full. My personal cell phone began ringing on the cedar table beside me. It was an unlisted corporate number from Pinnacle Group's primary executive exchange. I let it ring 3 full times, watching the screen glow, before calmly sliding my thumb to answer. Grant Vance, I said smoothly. Grant! Thank God you answered, came the frantic, high-pitched voice of Wallace Drake, Pinnacle Group's chief legal counsel. Wallace was a man who usually projected supreme corporate authority, but right now he sounded like a passenger aboard a plunging airliner. Hello, Wallace, I replied, taking a slow sip of my iced tea. How can I help you this afternoon? Grant, we are experiencing an unprecedented corporate emergency, Wallace blurted out, speaking so fast he was practically gasping for air. We received a formal notice of immediate default and a $48 million fee clawback demand from Crestview Global less than an hour ago. They have terminated the master agreement based on Section 14. I am aware of Section 14, Wallace, I said calmly. Grant, Preston Thorne acted completely outside his authority, Wallace shouted, his voice trembling over the speaker. The board of directors met in an emergency session 20 minutes ago. We have formally terminated Preston Thorne for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and catastrophic failure of oversight. He has been escorted from the building by security. I remained silent, letting the news hang in the quiet air. Grant, please, Wallace pleaded. We need you back immediately. The board has unanimously voted to appoint you Vice President of Enterprise Strategy, effective right now. We are doubling your compensation package, granting full equity options, and giving you absolute authority over all corporate accounts. We just need you to sign an immediate reinstatement agreement and call Simon Patel to rescind the default notice. I looked out across my sunny backyard, watching a pair of songbirds settle onto the wooden fence. It was a staggering offer, a title upgrade, double the salary, and complete executive authority. 2 weeks ago, a younger version of myself might have considered it a victory. But after 25 years in corporate strategy, you realize that stepping back into a toxic house that only values you when the roof is on fire is an invitation to get burned again. Wallace, I said quietly, my voice entirely steady. When Preston Thorne called me legacy DNA and stripped my account duties, your legal department did not raise a single objection. When Gavin Miller handed me voluntary separation papers this morning, no one in executive leadership asked for a review. You did not value my presence when I was maintaining your business. You only value my name now that your firm is facing financial ruin. Grant, we can negotiate any terms you want. Wallace begged, his voice cracking. Name your salary, name your office location. Just help us save this account. My position has not changed, Wallace, I said firmly. Section 14 was drafted to protect Crestview Global from corporate negligence. The contract has been breached, and I will not lend my reputation to cover for your firm's systemic failures. Good luck with your board review. I ended the call without waiting for his response. I placed the phone back on the table and smiled softly into the evening light. Not 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the caller identification displayed the direct line of Crestview Global's executive office. I answered on the second ring. Grant Vance speaking. Grant, it is Diane Montgomery, came the strong, clear voice of Crestview's chief executive officer. Good afternoon, Mrs. Montgomery, I replied warmly. I assume Wallace Drake has already called you in a state of absolute panic, she asked, a subtle trace of humor in her tone. He was somewhat distressed, I admitted. He has every reason to be, Diane said firmly. Crestview Global has formally severed all contractual ties with Pinnacle Group. We will be pursuing full legal recovery of all advance retainers, along with statutory damages under breach of fiduciary covenants. But that is not why I am calling you. I listened quietly as she continued. Grant, our board met 30 minutes ago to finalize our new operational direction. We are not interested in hiring another massive corporate agency that views key accounts as leverage for junior executives. We place our trust in proven leadership. We want you to establish your own independent strategic advisory firm, and we want Bennett and Vance Advisory to take over full principal governance of Crestview's $412 million account directly. I stood up from my chair, walking over to the wooden railing of the deck. Principal consultancy, I said softly. Full principal authority, Diane confirmed. Direct reporting to our executive board, absolute autonomy over compliance architecture, and a 4-year master contract structured entirely on your terms. Simon Patel is already drafting the engagement documents. I looked out toward the horizon, feeling the weight of decades of hard work. Quiet patience and uncompromising integrity finally crystallize into absolute professional freedom. I would be honored to accept, Mrs. Montgomery, I said. Wonderful, she replied. Come by our boardroom tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We will sign the master agreement and celebrate a new chapter.